Like in any industry, teachers come and go from their North Carolina teaching jobs. Some even leave the profession entirely. A draft report that has been submitted to the State Board of Education looks at the data about the teaching profession in North Carolina. And our Dr. Terry Stoops is here to tell us what is in that draft report. He is the Director of Research and Education Studies for the John Locke Foundation. Terry, welcome back.
Thank you.
The narrative that we have heard for months and months now is that teachers are leaving our state by the thousands. Are they really?
No, not really. And it's interesting that we're hearing this narrative because I went and looked at what was talked about when the teacher turnover report would be released under Democratic administrations. And it's really interesting that this kind of alarm wasn't raised when the Democrats were in charge. Instead, it was a lot of talk about we'll do better next year and we'll have program X or Y in place to make sure teachers stay. But since the Republicans have taken over and Governor McCrory has taken over the governor's mansion, the narrative has been that Republican policies are pushing teachers away, and it's just not true.
So what do we know about the profession in this draft report? Certainly, there are some teachers who are leaving the state of North Carolina. What do we know about them?
Well, overall, teachers are leaving for personal reasons. This idea that teachers are looking at statewide policies or various other things that are going on in the education policy realm is a real myth. I mean, they're leaving because they weren't suited for the classroom. They had a spouse that moved to another state. They retired. Very few teachers are making the decision to leave North Carolina to teach in another state. In fact, when you look at the overall teaching workforce, less than 1% of our teacher workforce decides to go teach in another state. And that's the one thing that we hear a lot about, especially in the media, is that we're pushing teachers to other states that pay more. Well, in some cases, yes. In some cases, no. But I find that there really isn't a lot we can do in most cases to keep teachers here that would leave for another state.
It sounds as if teachers are just like the rest of us who aren't teachers, that there are personal reasons that you might move out of state or personal reasons that you might not like your work environment. And in some cases, maybe some of those really, really politically active folks are indeed leaving because they don't like the policies under the Republicans. But it just doesn't sound like it's some major issue that North Carolina should be concerned about.
It's not. Our attrition rate, that is the teachers that leave the classroom, is around 9%, and that's comparable to a lot of private sector industries. It's comparable to the nonprofit sector, and actually it's pretty common, a common percentage amongst other states. And we find that the fact that 9% is leaving can be a good thing. And the way we know that it's a good thing, especially in this report, because they looked at the effectiveness of teachers that left the classroom. And that's a key addition that has been made because of the North Carolina General Assembly and Governor McCrory deciding that the teacher turnover report that we've had in the past was misleading and didn't have a whole lot of information. They passed legislation that would ensure that we looked at the effectiveness of teachers that are leaving the classroom.
What did we find?
Well, we found exactly what I suspected and have been talking about for years, is that teachers that leave North Carolina classrooms are less effective than those who stay. That's an absolutely critical finding. And let me just reiterate that the only reason why we know that is because the General Assembly and Governor McCrory decided that we needed a better teacher turnover report. And so they ordered the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction to look at the effectiveness of teachers that are leaving. They found that they're less effective. And to be honest, I want less effective teachers to leave our classroom. If our goal is to give a quality education to every child, that means we should have an effective teacher in every classroom. And our less effective teachers, I don't want them anywhere near our classroom. And so if they're leaving for other states or if they're leaving for other industries, other professions, that's fine by me.
When you say effective and that those leaving are less effective, how do we define effectiveness?
They define effectiveness as growth. So are the teachers that are staying and leaving providing 1 year's worth of academic growth for these students? So it's not based on necessarily just straight up test scores or proficiency rates. Are the students that are taking classes with these teachers growing as much as they should. And we find that teachers that are leaving are not growing as much as those who have classes with those who are staying. And this is one of the advantages of looking at growth, is that we can attribute the performance of students when we look at growth to the teacher, because we're only talking about a 1-year time frame, and we're not talking about what's happened in the past and everything that a kid is bringing with them to the classroom.
Are we seeing any trends in the data of the folks who are leaving the North Carolina classroom? Are they young teachers? Are they people who've been in the system 20 or 30 years? What do we know about them, other than their effectiveness being lower than those who are staying?
Well, we find that in the first 5 years is really the period where we have the highest turnover rate, where the most individuals leave the classroom. And that's understandable. People go in there thinking that they want to teach. They find out the realities of teaching are not what they expected, and so they leave. So we expect attrition in that first 5 years. But here is the important part to note, is that the Republican General Assembly and Governor McCrory recognized that our highest attrition was in the first 5 years. And so what they did was they decided to focus pay increases on that first 5 years, to the point where no teacher starting in the profession will make less than $35,000 a year, and most teachers actually make more than that when you add a local supplement. They saw that the problem was in the first 5 years, and they addressed it by increasing pay to ensure that those good teachers that are having a difficult time in the first 5 years stay in the classroom, and that their financial situation is not dire, that instead they're giving a good basis from which to start and a good incentive to stay in the classroom.
Terry, you've been a teacher yourself. When you first went into the classroom, what is it that you found that maybe you didn't expect? Because you're saying that some of these early year teachers, it's not what they thought it was going to be. What's different?
It's exhausting, for one. I think most teachers don't realize just how exhausting it is to teach 4 or 5 classes a day and 130 students. But, the other part about it is that much of what a teacher does is not only communicate content, but they have to make sure that the classroom is an orderly one. And so classroom management is a critical part of a teacher's job that isn't necessarily something that a teacher that comes out of a teacher education program would have a lot of experience or a lot of background in learning ways to make sure that the classroom is kept orderly so that you can communicate the content that's required.
How do you better prepare someone to be an effective teacher?
Well, I think getting them in the classroom is absolutely critical, ensuring that we have a teacher education program that gets teacher candidates into the classroom, whether it be for some sort of internship or student teaching, that would allow them to practice those things that they learn in the classroom. I think it's absolutely critical that we take a better approach to training them with practical means rather than theoretical means in the classroom, giving them that practical experience.
Does that mean we need some changes perhaps to the curriculum in our teacher education schools on our campuses?
I mean, absolutely. We've needed that for several decades. It's probably the hardest thing to change is our teacher education programs. And I think this is going to be something that the next General Assembly, that the governor is definitely going to look at in making those changes that are necessary to ensure every child has a quality classroom.